Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
We're going to talk about something today that pretty much affects all of us, and you might not even know it truly affects you, and it's PTSD. Now, whenever you hear those four letters, most of us immediately conjure up a picture of somebody in the military suffering a flashback or something triggering them, but PTSD is that and a lot more. You suffered any kind of trauma in your life, you may have PTSD. How do you deal with it? How do you recognize it? We're going to talk with somebody who helps people with that all the time. He is the owner of Healthy Counseling Center. He's an amazing mental health coach, and he's back with us. Dr. Ray Smith is on the program. Hi, Ray. How are you?
Well, I'm very well, Steve. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, great to have you back here. And I'm very happy we're talking about PTSD first and foremost with the war situation in the last week. That no doubt has kicked out PTSD in many members of our military, right?
Yes, I'm in Spokane. We have an Air Force base here. We have lots of active duty folks. We also have a lot of veterans here because of the VA hospital and many other veteran programs. But for example, a veteran was in my office this week who has been triggered by everything in the media, and not just the media. Once he saw this war going on, he was downstairs and his dogs were upstairs. They're big dogs on hardwood floor. And every bang that he heard from those footsteps just triggered him to where he had to sit there and get grounded and use our breathing techniques that we've been going over, and he could get through it. But he knew it's not just him. Everybody that he was in the military with, lots of them that were in Afghanistan are back again now involved in this. His nephew's in the Air Force. He may well be on the Gerald Ford right now. So the active duty folks, they know people who are involved. The families of military and veterans are having a lot of flashbacks and memories they prefer not to have. PTSD is not just for people who've been involved in war. All of the first responders here in Washington, we had a lot of wildfires again this summer. Those guys are all traumatized. One of them, my coach, went back to his pickup truck and camper, and they were just cinders because the fire was being handled someplace else. And when he came back, there was nothing there. Well, that's traumatic. Every time that he thinks, where's my, and it was in the pickup or it was in the camper, and now that's gone. So policemen and EMTs, it's a lot of people in trauma every day that you and I don't want to see. And I'm grateful that they take care of those things. Yesterday, I was talking with a rape victim, and her PTSD gets triggered by all kinds of things, especially with the thought of having to go to trial. And often what happens for the victim is the defense attorney rapes them again right there on the stand, and all that stuff just floods them. So she is appropriately nervous about giving a good testimony and not, it's your fault you were wearing perfume or some other nonsense. I understand the strategy in the game of defense attorney work, but for people who've already been hurt, to hurt them again intentionally for some, I think, corrupt purpose is wrong.
Yeah. Totally agree.
PTSD triggered by the war has some other complications. The BBC had a big article this week on the financial anxiety that people are having because of the unknown that's coming up, and especially wondering, can I handle this? And am I inadequate? Am I poorly prepared? Oh, be prepared. We should circle back to your son as the Eagle Scout. I think that is a phenomenal example of growth and development. And we were talking a little about him and his knife and coming back with all 10 fingers and thumbs. I looked
and
it up.
my anxiety when he was way younger, but that was on my radar. It's like, oh God, I hope he's going to be okay. It was, it's understandable, I guess, my anxiety at that point, but really I need to let it go. And I did way back then.
But you couldn't protect him. There is a word in psychology that is about fascination with knives. And I think every Boy Scout in whittling and wood carving has had that fascination. And then the other one is the synonym with Boy Scout is pyromaniac, because we all like starting and keeping fires and roasting marshmallows and all those kinds of things. Well, those things do give more anxiety to our parents, I think, than it does when you're in Scouts.
Sure.
So that vicarious trauma, what if? That's anxiety. And that's partly what's going on with post-traumatic stress disorder. It doesn't even have to be a life-threatening event. I have worked with PTSD survivors that have had car wrecks or had a bloody hand. One gentleman I coached this week had a finger bashed badly, and he can't see blood, but what he remembers a very tragic event. Didn't threaten his life, but it hadn't quit happening. So when someone has had a traumatic event and has anxiety with it, it could be looked at as irrational thinking because they're not in harm's way right now. But the video and audio recordings that they are playing still do all of the things that are picked up on a lie detector, galvanic skin response, heart rate, respirate, all the things that happen to us when we're in fight, flight, freeze, or foggy brain come back again when those videos are played in somebody's head. There are some things that all anxiety disorders have in common. For example, everybody with a little anxiety has an excessive response to a perceived threat. We talked last time about many of our anxieties or worry about things that don't come true. And some of the things we worry about come out, I think they said 85% better than we'd even imagined. The excessive worry with anxiety gets us tense, and we have those prolonged physiological reactions and some stinking thinking again that leads us to be worse able to handle things than if we could cool our jets a little bit. The physical symptoms that come with anxiety, and especially with PTSD, the racing heart, trembling, sweating, shortness of breath, muscle tension, restlessness. Sometimes you'll see just people trying to get themselves under control, and it is terrible. But these physical symptoms can vary in intensity, just like the thoughts or the feelings. The way we diagnose PTSD and other anxiety disorders is how frequently does this happen? And when it happens, how intense is it? And when it happens, how long? What's the duration of how it lasts? And then what's the impact on your life and those who care about you? So, for example, with PTSD, are you having flashbacks frequently, every day, every hour? Are you having to avoid the media so that you don't have those? The duration, is that just a couple of minutes and then I'm back here in 2023, I'm not in the desert, I'm okay? And the intensity of it could be mild, like, oh, I had a thought, now I'm back to the family. Or the intensity could be debilitating, where somebody's going to bed and covering their eyes and trying to get something like your headset on their ears to keep more triggers from happening. And the big thing, I just got off the phone with a fellow whose anxiety is making his work intolerable, and the impact that's going to have on him, his family, his finances, it's huge. To get that under control is a good goal for our care. The stinking thinking we talked a little about, the avoidance behavior is important too, because when, let's say someone has a panic attack in the grocery store, then they don't want to go to that grocery store anymore. Then they don't want to drive around where that grocery store is. Then they don't want to get in the car because that's how they got there. And then they don't want to leave the house because that's how they got into the car. Don't want to leave their bedroom because that's how it all started. And that in itself is traumatizing, to become afraid of being afraid. And the impact on the life there, where you're secluded and sort of turtle reflex, where you're pulling your head and your body back into your shell, it's hard to function that way. And these folks need our compassion and care all the time.
Is it safe to assume, Ray, that anybody that's been through a trauma, and they come in all different shapes and forms as we identified, anybody that's been through one can be a sufferer of PTSD?
Yes. And the studies have shown that some of the mental health that folks had going into trauma helps or disrupts how they overcome it. In World War II, when our soldiers came home, they had days or weeks on ships talking with each other about what had happened. And I think there was a conspiracy afoot. I think they came back saying, we're not telling anybody about what going on. You know, it was my dad's deathbed before he was willing to tell us about what happened in Italy. The time to wind down from that hyper arousal that those soldiers had, by the time they got off the ship, rode the train home, they were coping better. In my generation, the guys coming back from Vietnam, if they were seen, they were spit upon, they didn't have any time. They would get on a plane in Saigon and they would be home 12 hours later and there was no one to talk with. There was no place to de-stress. And that's where a lot of guys my age started using substances to just change or numb how they felt inside because they didn't want to remember all those things. When prazosin started getting used by the military, it diminishes nightmares. And guys who hadn't slept since they left Vietnam, they were afraid to. The nightmares were too awful. They'd take that drug and first time in decades that they've been able to sleep. It's wonderful what we can do now for PTSD. The part about PTSD now with all the media exposure of Ukraine and Israel is vicarious trauma. Any of us with some empathy, wow, if that was our apartment building, if that was our children that were blown up or bleeding, we could identify with that. What if we'd been in one of those concrete buildings we see going down on video? Almost any question that starts with what if is anxiety thinking. It's compassionate to be empathetic. What if the war kills more civilians and massacres people? Well, the Maui fires, they couldn't even identify all of the dead and had to make those fire scenes sacred places because they were in effect burial grounds for the cremations. And dealing with that culturally sensitive, well, we have to do that with the Palestinians and the Israelis. We have to do that with the Ukraine and the Russian, the oligarchs and bureaucrats. And there's corruption, it seems like everywhere. Well, that's contagious. We all feel that. We all suffer with and for those people who are being traumatized again. One of the nice things about military PTSD is there are veterans groups that support each other. When they get together, that's a safe place to say, have you guys been feeling this? Or what does your spouse do when you get triggered this way? And they have that support that the band of brothers are dependent upon. Those of us who didn't see our military equipment left in Afghanistan and feel like the body count was a waste, we can't entirely empathize with the guys who saw that. They can. And they can ask each other, what did you feel? Did you think it was a waste? Did you feel betrayed by the government? What could I do to give you a hand with this? When those guys are sitting in a small group and being vulnerable with each other, that's going to straighten out some of their thinking, which will reduce some of their anxiety, which will make them behave differently. Instead of being ashamed of myself that I saw these things in trauma, I'm going to talk with other people who've been traumatized. And back to our scouting example, however old you are in scouts, there's older guys who helped you, and there's younger guys you can help. Same way with that small group. When the veterans get together, then maybe what I learned after Vietnam, I could tell somebody that just got out of Afghanistan a little while ago. And then when some of our other soldiers come back from the desert, maybe what I've learned to deal with my children, I can help them with theirs. And serving others is a great way to diminish anxiety and that feeling of just incompetence. I can't handle all this. No, nobody can. There's other forms of anxiety that are in the news besides the war. I don't know if we can do show and tell with this, but this is from Psychotherapy Networker, and it shows a young person with an app on the phone and what kind of anxiety do you have. And so I think that takes some of the stigma out. If those guys sit in a circle, well, is it this bad, or this bad? They can dare to talk about that. Nobody is going to be critical of me that I had some stinking thinking, some emotional reaction, some avoidance behavior, because they all know what it's like.
What do you
And
do
it's
in those situations where you don't have somebody that can empathize or has dealt with it? And I've got two friends. One of them, her husband suddenly passed away 2 years ago, and she's come a long way. But I mean, a long way. It was a year ago, you couldn't even get her to go to a restaurant.
Oh, wow.
And
well, how long had it been since you'd gone alone? I mean, think about it.
Well, he passed away 2 years ago, so it was a year ago. Oh, and they were together since high school. And I've worked with her on a lot of things. Now she's fantastic. In fact, I'm taking her to a comedy show tonight. She's great.
Wonderful.
But every night she wakes up in her sleep with a panic attack. Almost, I'm going to say 95% of the time, if not maybe 99% of the time, in the middle of the night. And it could be things that she was thinking before she went to bed, or she even revealed recently that she didn't get into detail, but she had images of things that just, rattled her. And she did find her husband. So I'm sure the images are etched. And then I have another friend who his girlfriend had a stroke before his eyes.
Oh, wow.
And at the time he was probably 40. And now he's 45, 46, and he still deals with it. And also the fact that, as he describes it, her family did nothing to help her after the stroke. He came to her rescue. He was at the hospital helping. And, he hit the bottle after that, just to cope. And we text. I haven't seen him in probably 6 months because he just shut it all down and started healing. He's in a good place. But people like that, outside of the military situation where there can be some support, how do you work with people like that? How do they heal? What's the process?
A couple of ideas. For example, the lady who lost her husband, I used to run grief recovery groups, and we would throw it in their face, I guess, because we met at a funeral home. And the people were there and there was no avoidance. You couldn't pretend that you hadn't lost a spouse of many years. And again, Band of Brotherhoods, all those widows could understand what the others were feeling. And
wow.
Do you sleep with your husband's shirt with his cologne on it? Yeah. And it sort of legitimized some of the transitions that they've gone through. One of the reasons that I like telehealth and coaching online like this is there's no embarrassment. So, for example, with the widow lady, she doesn't have to drive somewhere and cry her eyes out and not be safe driving home. But the other part is 24/7, there are places online that she could go when she has those 95% nights and talk with other people who are struggling with their bereavements.
She does that. She actually does it. Every Wednesday, there's a group that meets and they all talk about everything. And just real quick, I want to go back to what you said. Did you say the bereavement group meets at a funeral home?
I did. And that was how Psychobabble calls it exposure therapy. So, for example, the man whose girlfriend had the stroke in front of him, if he will look at a picture of that location, or if he will look online at something about stroke management aftercare, if he goes to that place, if he one day takes her to that place, If one day he lets go of the bottle and takes hold of her and talks about how powerless and helpless that he felt, inadequate, not knowing what to do or say or give to her, then he's exposing himself. Easy one's the phobia about elevators. If you were my patient and you were afraid of riding in an elevator, we'd talk about it. We'd look at pictures of elevators. We'd go to a building with an elevator. We'd push the button. The next time we'd step on, step off. The next time right up. And pretty soon the exposure to it was, oh, well, this is the safest form of transportation in the world. Mm-hmm. And you'd be okay. Might still have a nightmare every now and then that the brake systems fail or something like that, but it would have less and less impact on you as time went on. For meeting in a graveyard or a funeral home to deal with bereavement may sound cruel, but if you can think, reality is someday people will be back here for me. And my feelings are acceptance. I don't like this. Accepting things doesn't mean you like it. It means that I acknowledge reality. I admit the truth. My husband of all these years has passed away, and it sucks. Yep. So let's be there. Let's face it. Let's feel it. Let's try and get over it together. And I think that's the message for both of those friends of yours. You don't have to do that alone. Let's go to the comedy club,
You know what? Since the day I met her, I tell her one thing. I got you.
Mm-hmm.
Don't worry about it. Like she'll start, well, how am I going to do the lawn? And what am I going to do here? Things that he did, when summer kicked in, like, I don't know how to do the pool. And they got a pool just before he passed. So I'm like, don't worry about it. Come over, help to do the landscaping, took care of it. It's all good. I'm a firm believer in things happen for a reason. So not more than an hour ago, I was at a funeral home. I do marketing as well as broadcasting, and I work with a lot of funeral homes. It just happened that way. I'm going to make that suggestion to make them available to any groups based on your suggestion. Again, less than an hour ago. Just left. So there's something there, things I think things come up for a reason. And my friend who watched his girlfriend have the stroke and then eventually passed, he's let the bottle go. And that's why he's kind of in a, I'm just doing my own thing. And, when he and I would get together, we'd have a couple of beers, but even that I think that's why he doesn't go out. He just kind of, he's on the heel, the healing, on the mend. But he realizes it, he knows. And even when it comes to new relationships, right away, he shuts you down. Like, even if you say, hey, I got a girl, and nope. He's got to get through it. I was where I'm going with that.
Yes. But that's one of the primary diagnostic criteria for PTSD, that avoidance. I don't want to meet another girl.
Yeah.
And substance abuse is almost one-to-one at some point when people are trying to get through like that. Wouldn't you rather be numb than feel that helplessness or hopelessness? And when you think, if I'd have known more, could I have done more? All that self-critic. We all have an inner critic saying stuff that we shouldn't say to ourselves. We'd have never said it to you or anybody else. But inside, it's a temptation. I'd like to have something that, like nicotine, they say it takes 3 seconds to go from your mouth to your dopamine. Wow. If you want to get to change your mood, well, that's expedient, but what's best long term? Well, maybe to have my friend come over and landscape the pool. Maybe to go to a comedy club. If laughter really is the best medicine, then let's go do that together. Because belly laugh does more for your biochemical, electrical, hormonal brain than anything.
And honestly, she thought I got the tickets for free. I bought them.
Well, hope she's not listening.
Why? Because she wanted to see this comedian.
Good.
And it's like, what the heck? I'd like to check him out too. And it's like, but it's, I guess, call that a diversion from, regular life and things like that. How does the process work with you and your center? If somebody's dealing with PTSD, having things come up, triggers from traumas, how does it work?
counseling works with the ones who are in pain and have been since the trauma happened in the first place. Counseling is supposed to go back and try and get you set for today. The coaching would be like for your friend who's put down the bottle. And now, as we look toward the future, what's your goal? Well, I don't only want to cope. I'd like to someday be open to being open to one of these gals that Steve's shoving down my throat. Well, that's a legitimate goal. So how do we go from here, where not at all, to where I'm at least open and hoping?
Yep.
And that's a journey where a coach can walk alongside. And when people recognize that it's safe, the trauma was awful, but I'm okay right now. I want to be okay in the future. I want to be more okay. I want 95% of the nights to go to 90 to 85 to 5 to once a year on his birthday or our wedding anniversary or something like that. So you can see what the end goal is. We want results when we're doing counseling or coaching. And so anybody that would come to those funeral homes that you're talking with, they would come at least wanting symptom relief. They may not be clear that I want, in psychobabble, it's called the internalization of the object. It makes people sound bad, but the one I loved, I want to carry with me. And all that was good about that, I want to keep in the scrapbook of my heart. The things that weren't, like seeing a stroke right before your eyes, I want to let that go. I don't need to have that in my future. So counseling is to try and get you over the past. Coaching is to get you toward your future. So relief in both ways. The frequency, intensity, duration, and impact are bad enough in anxiety that it's pathologized and said, hey, if it's this bad, you need counseling. Well, I've gotten a lot of this behind me and I want to be looking at where I'm going. Well, then let's coach you. Let's get there. The other half of coaching is cheerleading. You put the bottle down, way to go. You went to the comedy club without him on your arm, way to go. You know, there's some cheerleading that comes with that stuff too.
I'm glad that we talked about and thanks for bringing that up, the difference between the counseling and the coaching. And you're bringing back thoughts in my mind. My mom passed 4 years ago. I found her when she was no longer with us. Thank you. But I have to tell you, I thought that I would never lose that image.
Yeah.
I thought I never would. And I have. You know, if I try hard, I can bring it back. But it almost doesn't seem real because I believe that she's always around and she's there to support me. And I think my relationship is even closer with her now because in spirit, and I'm not getting religious or anything here, but I believe, you know, that she's around. I've asked for signs. I've gotten them. That's a whole other topic. Very specific, whatever you want to believe. But I've let that go. Just what you said.
Good. Because that was a moment. It was awful and even traumatic to be the one who found her. But all the years prior to that you had with her, there's where the scrapbook memories want to go.
100%.
Why would I want to remember finding her? Why would I want to remember her funeral? Let me tell you about that Mother's Day. And then your mind goes to those things you don't want to ever forget.
They're all gone. I know it sounds ridiculous, but I've, call it, maybe I'm blocking them out, but they don't serve me. So why am I going to hold on to them? I don't need to. There was a period of time through, the beginning of the grieving that, the image would come up and there she was. And could I have done anything? No. I know she had already passed when I showed up. And it was just me and her. And I have a twin sister. And I called her, didn't get into detail. I said, just come to mom's. Took her a while to get there. She was a distance away. And when she did, she wanted to go into the bathroom where mom was. I'm like, you don't want to go in there. You don't need to. Right. Yeah. We're out of time. Yeah, this is great. I'm glad we went down, especially with the situation that's happening in our world today and PTSD. Best way to find you, the center. What's your website?
HealthyCounselingCenter.com is for the counseling. And then Dr. Ray at drraysmith.com is the email for drraysmith.com. That's where we do our coaching. So to go to there, we even will honor you. We have the last podcast up on our website already, and I appreciate you sending me those links and things. But that's our hope. Let's get the messages out so it'll ripple through not just the practice here, but the world. If we can make a difference to a soldier headed to Israel, I want to be there.
Yeah. And thank you for that. Thank you for today. Just
You're welcome.
You have a way of making things clear and making those goals seem attainable, like we were talking about with people dealing with PTSD. So thanks again, Ray. Looking forward next time we get together.
Me too. Thanks again.
Are you looking for even more of the podcasts and hosts that you love? The Podcast Business News Network is proud to announce that you now have even more ways to listen live. Check out the MyTuner Radio, online radio box, and Simple Radio apps on iOS and Android, or find us online. Search for Business News Network on mytuner-radio.com, or search Podcast Business News Network on streama.com and onlineradiobox.com/US. Take your podcast on the go and don't miss a minute of the action.
Broadcasting from the business capital of the world, this is the Podcast Business News Network.
For nearly 2,000 severely injured veterans, everyday life has become filled with barriers.
Day-to-day simple tasks can become pretty daunting.
I have to carry my chair up 2 flights of steps or have somebody do it for me.
What scares me the most is just the falling.
When I'm struggling with my house, I think, to have that one great barrier just knocked down, it's crucial.
Home for Our Troops is a wonderful nonprofit that builds a
Mortgage-free, fully adaptive, handicap-accessible house. And there's no catch.
It'll be our very first home that we've ever owned.
This is a game changer.
This is where your life begins again.
We need you to join us in completing this important mission. Please visit hfotusa.org and help build homes and rebuild lives.
Because of you, everything's going to be okay.